community American citizenry is the ability to vote. It's a right guaranteed us in our nation's laws, and so we're truly excited to see a room full of so many people. Thank you so much for being here today. Today's debate is between Kaden and Michael, and we'll be debating conditional election. The title of our debate is Conditional Election. Now is the time for all good people to come to the aid of their party or not. This event is being held courtesy of Dordt College's Communication Club and was organized by Senior Elizabeth Balcamp, our work study. So if we could just give her a round of applause. So I'm just going to quick introduce myself. My name is Ashley Blumhoff. I'm a senior here at Dordt College, majoring in English and Communications. And I got asked for this moderating position not only because I'm interested in political studies, I have a political minor here, but also because, like you, I'm really interested to see what these guys have to say. I'm on the fence as well. I have yet to fill in that beautiful circle next to one of the candidates' names. So, like you, I'm very excited to see what the gentlemen have to say today. So tonight we're going to be focusing on the issue of voting, and our debaters will be presenting arguments revolving around this central resolution. So I really want you guys to try to keep this following sentence in your mind as kind of a guiding arrow throughout the rest of the debate, okay? So the resolution is as follows. The American public should vote for one of the two main party candidates. I'll say that one more time. The American public should vote for one of the two main party, Republican or Democrat, candidates. So the reasoning behind our framing of this resolution is as follows. In this election, perhaps more than any other presidential election, many people have been advocating not to vote for either Trump or Hillary. Some would say, understandably so. While others have been saying not to vote at all. Those voting along one of the two main party lines suggest that not voting for a party candidate is un-American or perhaps even cowardly. On the flip side, however, those intending not to vote for the Democrat or Republican ticket cannot understand how anyone could vote for either of the two main party candidates this year. So tonight we'll be discussing this dividing issue and perhaps persuade you to further consider your voting intentions come next week. So at this time we're actually going to do something you might not have expected. We're going to hold a pre-debate vote. And so I'm going to ask you to raise your hand either in favor of or against the resolution that I previously stated. And Elizabeth is going to count the votes. We'll do this via hand raising, okay? So again, I'd like to restate the resolution, and please, everyone participate. No shame either way. But we just like to kind of get a general feel of the audience at this time. And so, if you are in favor of the idea that the American public should vote for one of the two main party candidates, please raise your hand at this time. And raise them high. Okay. And now all those opposed to that idea, please raise your hand.
I hope you all voted in this instance.
Yeah.
This.
So for the resolution, 17, and against the resolution, 23. So that's something to keep in mind. And we have a few new people that have come into this.
Thanks for coming, guys. Okay, so now I'm going to quick jump into some introductions of our debaters, and then we're just going to jump in right away, okay? So first, speaking in favor of tonight's resolution is Michael Gomez. Michael is a junior here at Dordt College. He's from Dakar, Senegal. All right, studying history. Based on his extensive intercultural experience, Michael sees the power of main party voting, and feels strongly that voting for a main party candidate, especially in the United States, is the responsibility of every conscious citizen. Michael is active on the debate team and on the growing rugby team that he himself helped create. Thank you so much, Michael, for helping us out today. All right, speaking against the resolution is Caden Tinklenberg. Caden is a senior from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, studying chemistry and biology here at Dordt. Caden is an active libertarian and has long considered the two-party system to be limiting and unrepresentative of the general population. He has also advocated voting for third-party candidates in the past. Caden is active on the debate team as well as Student Symposium, the Diamond, and Kuiper Scholars Program. Let's welcome Caden. All right, at this point in time, we're going to begin the debate. We're going to start with Michael, and he's going to begin his round of opening arguments in favor of tonight's resolution. Michael, I'm going to give you 7 minutes on the clock, and then when you have 1 minute left, I'm going to somehow try to get your attention from over this side, okay? All right, so let's begin.
All right, first, thank you for having me and Caden here tonight. This presidential election. Over the course of all of the campaigns, we have seen several candidates come and go. We have seen that the public's preferences have switched. Now, before we talk about what action should we take in regards to the country's next 4 years, perhaps the question we should ask is what motivated us to act in a way or another? As far as voting goes, a lot of things need to be brought to light before we can have a good conversation about it. Is it a civic duty? Is it more of a moral obligation? Is everyone allowed to vote? Who can vote, and how does that impact the nation's future? You are American, so I suppose you know a lot more than I do in American history. But we have seen that the population that was allowed to vote has increased, but not without hardship. Blood has been spilled, lots of argumentation has happened, all hoping to create a society in which everyone is able to voice their opinion or their dissent. What we have seen then is that voting is a means for the public to be able to express what they expect of government, and also their means of holding the government accountable for the standards that they have set. We have the candidates that come, we vote for them, and the majority, the one who has the support of the majority, then goes into office. Why then should we vote for one of the major parties? As far as this election goes, in the American system, there isn't much room for a third party to be able to be president or even make their way into Congress. We have seen that the way that the two political parties monopolized the election means that if you want to be represented, if you want your agenda to be represented at a national level, you would need to follow one of the main parties. By abstaining to vote, you essentially suppress your own voice, your own say in their own platform. Hence, voting for either parties allows you to be able to really have your interests put forward. Furthermore, we have seen that with the increasing dissatisfaction from the public in their own parties, both candidates have had to review their platform, have had to reevaluate what they are proposing, so that they can try to get more of a popular support rather than continue with their own notions of how they should run the country. Third parties and independents have voiced their frustration rather clearly over this election. We have seen with candidates such as Rand Paul, my personal favorite, Bernie Sanders, that they were able to affect both parties to a certain degree that the leading candidates now have to take into account the views of those that don't necessarily align with who they were originally. Trump supporters or Hillary Clinton supporters. Not all of them today were originally enthusiastic by having either of them where they are today. But by having their original candidates endorsing them, they were able to see that perhaps this is the best route to go, as they still maintain a say on how things will unfold. The two-party system then is the only way I see to be able to have your interests represented. Furthermore, voting is not something that is accessible to everybody. For instance, disabled people in the US, about a third of them, each time they want to vote, encounter some difficulties. They're not maybe able to go to the voting booth because they don't have friends that can take them, they don't have the means to be able to get there. Or once they get there, the facilities do not provide the means for them to vote. In this instance, we have about 35 million people that are disabled in the US, 46 which are not able to vote. That is a significant amount of people that, because of the way the system is built, do not have the means of expressing their views. But you have the right to vote. You can vote. So when you vote, you should keep in mind not only your personal interests, but also those that don't really have a say, either because there are no means or simply because due to citizenship or some form of bureaucracy, they cannot express their voice on their own. And this is how we have seen that the voting rights have been expanded to a larger demographic because select groups of people were able to represent not only their personal interests, but that of others. So when voting, we need to keep in mind how will that have repercussions on the country as a whole. And whoever gets to be the president will also have repercussions on the international scene. How will that also affect people outside? And this is where I think I really find interest in American politics, because American politics do set the pace for how a lot of things develop in the international scene, mostly when dealing with Russia. Voting then for one of the main parties is a more concrete mean of being able to express the rights that you have and to be able to perform both moral and civic duties in the sense that you can truly put an agenda forth that will be observed. We have seen in questions such as legalizing marijuana or gay marriage, to choose some controversial examples, that political parties will look into what third or independents are saying and try to adapt that into their agendas, either by restricting, not allowing, or pushing it forward. The major parties do keep a close eye to what the minor parties have to offer. But if you vote for one of them, you can be sure that your horse is the one in the race and that will win. And this is why I would advocate for voting for one of the main parties. Lastly, as far as this current presidential race goes, both Jill Stein and Johnson have an amazing amount of overlapping issues with that of the Democratic Party. Even if you are voting third due to a specific issue, you can still find it represented in one or the other party. So those are things you should keep in mind as you make your decision on whether or not to vote. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Michael. All right, Katie, same turn.
All right, well, my speech is not nearly as long or as prepared as Michael's. That was quite impressive, if I may say so myself. I would like to start out with a simple allegory to potentially help us understand the scenario that we're in this election cycle. So I know some of you may have heard of the trolley problem. For those of you who aren't versed in ethical dilemmas, the trolley problem consists of a runaway trolley heading down a track towards a switch in the line. And you, as the American voter, are the switchman. If you do nothing, the trolley will continue down the track and run over in the proper dilemma, it's 5 people. Whereas if you throw the switch, the trolley will be directed and run over 1 person. So the dilemma in ethics is whether or not you should act to save the quantity of life, or whether you should not be active in creating or causing the death of 1 person. So to apply this to this election cycle, I'm going to change some of the definitions a little bit. You may want to think that the trolley is compared to like Trump or the Trump train or something like that. Okay, it's not. The train is basically the outcome of the election. Okay, so we as the voters are directing the trolley, directing the outcome of the election, and we have the choice as voters to direct whether or not or which rail that trolley goes down. One rail results in a Hillary Clinton presidency. The other rail results in a Trump presidency. And now, depending on if you're in the Hillary camp or the Trump camp, you can debate on how many bodies are on each side of the rail. But what it comes down to is us as the switchmen, the voters, trying to decide whether or not we should throw that switch, whether or not we should vote to change which president or dictate which president gets the office. And you have to realize, though, that not every American has the power to throw the switch. In reality, only about 10 states are strong enough, have enough votes, the most significant votes, to actually force that switch over to one track or the other. So what we're hearing now in this binary sort of election conversation is the Trump track for the Trump supporters has very few bodies on it, but the Hillary Clinton track, on the other hand, has tons of bodies. These bodies represent things like abortion, like her emails, Benghazi, whatever. And then from the Hillary Clinton camp, you have the bodies on the Trump track compared to things like his bigotry or racism or his foreign policy, things like that, where voters on both sides are seriously concerned about what happens if the trolley goes down that track, what atrocity is going to come from that. And largely, that conversation, that sort of mentality is going to be used by millions this election cycle to justify throwing that switch. However, that is not the only action that switchmen can take, right? Why is this switchman not trying to signal the trolley to slow down? Why does the trolley even exist? Why does the trolley have the speed it has? Why are people on the tracks? Why is the office of the president such important position? Why does it have the power that it has to create the destruction that will likely happen depending on a Hillary Clinton presidency or a Trump presidency? So why are we as the switchmen only thinking that the only thing we can do is vote? Why do we think that votes are the only way that we can impact this election? Why are we not trying to stop the trolley? Why are we not looking for alternative sidings down which to direct the trolley? I think that's sort of the basis of my argument for why we can't escape this election by simply throwing the switch for one candidate or the other. And indeed, I think it's more important to focus on other ways to prevent catastrophe from coming other than by just voting. So.
Thank you. At this point in the debate, this is what the next strategy will be for about the next 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to ask one of these two gentlemen a question, and they'll have 2 minutes to give a response, after which their opponent will give his response, we'll reflect on it, and then we'll move on to the next question. We will do this 4 times, and then if time allows, we might try to sneak in 1 or 2 audience questions. So try to be thinking of something if you feel like a thought on your mind has not yet been addressed. So first question for you, Caden. What would you say to an individual who accused of, let me start over. What would you say to an individual who would say that a vote for a third-party candidate is wasteful?
Well, what do we want our vote to mean? What is the proper use of a vote? For a vote to be wasted, it alternatively must have some greater or more important use. And in my opinion, I don't think that voting for a Trump or Clinton presidency is a proper use of that vote. And so I don't think that voting for a third-party candidate is wasted, because it's a clear statement that I don't agree that my vote going to Trump or going to Clinton is a good thing. Therefore, there's nothing really to be wasted at this point in time. We're facing a situation in which if we vote for one of the 2 major party candidates, we're not going to get anything of value. You know, it's damage control at this point in time. And I don't believe that voting for a third-party candidate, or even not voting, is a wasted opportunity, because there's simply no opportunity to be had. So that's why I don't believe that voting for a third-party candidate is a wasted vote.
In your respects, Michael?
If we go back to his ethical dilemma about the train, one thing he forgot to mention is that in the dilemma in itself, you cannot stop the train, which is why you have to make a choice. By essentially refusing to vote, you are allowing this train to just take its own course. Might as well try to put into office someone you can work with, someone that you have reviewed the platform, and you can say, these are the things I agree with, these are the things I do not, and be able to really have an effect on how things are run, rather than just refuse to vote and not be able to even express how you feel about the presidency. You will be stuck with one candidate or the other. It's inevitable. Weld, running for the Libertarians as a vice president, stated so himself. At this point, we do not have a chance to win. Might as well vote for the one that we can work with. If you don't vote at this stage of the election, I would say you are essentially wasting your vote, because the message was sent clear and loud in previous stages of the election. So much so that the parties had to readapt their platforms. So at this point, not voting would be wasting it.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, gentlemen. My next question, Michael, starts with you. Is voting the only way to effect change within our nation? And if not, is it at least the most powerful or influential way?
I would say presidential vote is not the only way. However, local ballots is probably where you want to keep your eyes on. At the moment, I think we have a pretty large majority of Congress seats up for grabs because we'll have to recycle. States can choose specific policies they want to vote on. We see that between states, some increase the minimum wage, others decrease. If you want to make an effective change in your community and your surrounding, the election vote, the presidential election on its own will not really be the only means for you to do that. You can vote locally. So voting overall is probably the best means of making change.
All right, thank you. Caden?
Michael's right. One of the two major party candidates is going to win. And if we understand that and accept that, we can realize that whether we vote for someone else or not isn't really going to change the outcome of the election. So therefore, under that sort of notion, voting for one party, one candidate or the other is not going to make a large difference in this election. So, yeah, it's not a powerful way in which to influence the leaders of your country. It's much more powerful to talk with your politicians, that are currently in office, talk with others, write in papers, read books, and communicate on a one-to-one level with your peers. Because voting, your vote, it's not that it doesn't matter. It does. Like, it's, if no one voted, well, I don't even know what would happen if no one voted. But each individual voting does not make a difference, okay? So even in some of the mostly contested elections in previous years in Florida, the margins have still been by multiple thousands and thousands of votes. So individual votes aren't going to make a difference if that's the only thing you are trying to use to influence policy and influence who's guiding the country.
All right, thank you, Caden. My next question comes back to you then. Do you believe that voting is a privilege, a responsibility, or a right? And based on your answer, then how should us voters be guided as we enter the polls on November 8th?
I believe that voting is both a privilege and a right. Like Michael said in his opening statement, very few people around the world actually have the ability, the right to vote. And I think that we in America are privileged with that right, and that is something that we should be thankful for. That being said, it's not something that we are demanded to do. It is important and it is a right, and it would be terrible for a government or someone to infringe on that right or put into place policy that would prevent people from accessing that privilege. However, forcing people to do that is not what it's about. It's not about getting people to write down an answer or else. You know, it's about I'm excited about this candidate, therefore I want to give them my support. And it's not about, I hate this person and think they would be a terrible leader, therefore I'm gonna circle the other bubble. And when we reduce voting to that function, I think it loses its value, and I think we become slaves to the system. We're no longer voting for who we want to, but we're voting against those who are threatening us, threatening to rule over us. So.
Your response, Michael?
All of the above. I would argue that I would agree with Caden that forcing to vote is not helpful. Voting in Brazil is mandatory. In the 60s, the state of São Paulo had to vote for new governor. Because we have to vote, people voted for the rhinoceros at the zoo to be the governor. The rhinoceros won the election. The government had to ask for us to cast another vote, and this time they voted for a penguin. Eventually, the government had to say you have to vote for a human being, and then we were able to get back on track. However, where we are today, we need to take a step back. How did we get to the point we are? Originally, Caden was a strong supporter of Rand Paul, who ran as a Republican. But the problem was that due to most of the population not educating themselves thoroughly on the candidates and their platform, we were just deferring our votes to a more vocal crowd, reducing our options to what we have today. Most of us failed on our own responsibility to, well, I mean, not us, you guys, because I'm not American. But we failed, you failed, on really trying to have a thought-through decision to have candidates that could accurately represent you. So it is a responsibility and it is a right.
All right, thank you. And our one final question starts with you, Michael. Should educated voters push all individuals to vote, regardless of their understanding of policy or their moral conviction?
Regardless, absolutely not. In America, you have the right to express your opinion. However controversial it might be, but educated voters should encourage people to educate themselves and try to find the issues they can agree with, the ones that they do not, why they do not, and how to really address the question, so that when they vote not because of peer pressure from someone they deem more intelligent, but because they internalize the politics and are able to really think for themselves. And if they can do that and encourage other people to do the same, perhaps in 2020 we will have a more candidates with higher moral standards as well as intelligence, and we can just dream. But if everyone can really educate themselves, then yes.
All right, thank you. Caden?
Frequently I run into people who tell me that I have to vote, or it's unpatriotic to vote, and that I have to go vote, and then I ask them, well, which candidate are you voting for? And they say, well, I'm voting for Donald Trump. And I say, well, I was planning on if I went to vote for Hillary Clinton. And then all of a sudden they're not really so excited about me going out to vote. I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's because, I don't know, Hillary Clinton's unpatriotic or something. That could be. But it sort of shows how it's not really about being patriotic or about exercising your civic duty. People say that, but it's really a front, a disguise for them trying to get you to vote for their candidate. And I'd really be curious to know what percentage of the population actually deeply believes that abstaining from voting is unpatriotic or actually against the foundation, the moral foundation of what this country was founded on, or if it's really just a justification for them telling people that they have to vote for their candidate. And I think that's the case more often than not.
Okay, thank you guys. We're gonna wrap up. All right, something we'd like to do now is to open up the questions to the floor. What are you guys thinking? What are your responses? You've been sitting here listening for half an hour. So please keep your questions respectful. Raise your hand. I'll call on you. And then let's give each person about 3 minutes to respond. Okay, so does anyone have any questions?
For Caitlin, just something that came to my mind while the debate was going on. I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, like, I voted, now I have the right to complain. I know that's probably just something to get people to vote more often. It probably has little ground. I'd just like to know, how would you respond to that? Do you think because I made the conscious choice to not make my voice heard, I still have a right to complain? Or because, as Michael says, you let the trolley just take its own course, you have no more right in how the country goes?
Absolutely. I'm super glad that you brought that up, because it's a really good point that people use when, well, I voted for Obama and now I don't like him, or I voted for or you voted for Ralph Nader in 2000 and therefore you're responsible for whoever not getting elected, Bush or Al Gore not getting elected, or whatever. I would like to spin that idea a little bit, based on how I understand voting. Going back to my trolley analogy, if we view voting as the power, the strength, sort of, the action to throw that switch, then we are giving sanction to, or directing, or being in control of the presidency, of that power, and whatever comes down that track. We directed the train down that track, therefore I think we are responsible for whatever ends it comes to. So applying that to a voting setting, if you vote for Hillary Clinton, theoretically, you are the one who enabled her. You put her in power. If that's how you view voting, if you feel voting, if you envision voting as putting a person in power, you are therefore sanctioning and ergo responsible for whatever that presidency brings. So, if I'm not voting, am I more responsible for the ills of a future presidency, or is the people who voted for that president responsible? And in my opinion, it's not the people who didn't vote, it's the people who put that person in power that are responsible for whatever outcomes.
Michael, I'd be interested to hear your response, because do you think that mentality will deter people from voting from one of those two main party candidates?
I would say no. We can sit here and debate all day how we perceive voting, but in all practicality, one of the two is still going to be in office. Now, whether because you voted you are allowed to complain, I would say whether you vote or not, you always have this right. My question is, complaining on its own, what does it do? You should be more active, and that's when, again, I would bring back to looking at your local ballots and trying to be more proactive rather than just sitting in front of your TV, waving an angry fist each time Obama comes on the screen.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you guys. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yep, they're in the back, Joshua.
Michael, you mentioned that the Democratic Party has similar principles with the other third parties. Can you further explain what these similarities are and the examples?
If you look at their platform, Jill Stein pushes mostly environmental change, healthcare, legalizing marijuana. There's a lot of those issues. If you compare the platforms, Jill Stein and Hillary Clinton match 100%. The degree is the only thing that changes. Gary Johnson has a few differences. Now, I will admit I did not look at each individual issue to be able to name the specifics, but overall, the percentage match was about 80%. Both of these have 25 to very close to 0% match with the Republican Party. So I cannot really push my argument about third parties towards the Republicans. But that in the past it has changed, yes. Nader is a good example of how he really affected presidential candidates to have to consider what minority had to say, because he gained enough momentum from minor parties. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on that, Katie?
Not particularly.
No.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Let's start here, Marshall.
We both mentioned education, and I was wondering your thoughts on how to go about encouraging people to do that, because there's many people are dissatisfied and mistrustful of the and of any education system not named York College. And I wonder where you get, where you encourage people to go to for their information, as well as how do you talk to someone who is so polarized in one direction that they refuse to even discuss issues at all.
You wanna go first? Or
Sure.
okay.
As far as educating, when I first tried to have political conversations at work, more times than not, I would have clash, and I felt like I would be talking to all, and the person would feel like they were talking to all as well. I had to change my question. My question would then be, what is your experience of having a certain person into power? Then the person is able to articulate how they live under specific policies and why they disagree with it. They might not have the most refined political statement, but then you're able to see how why they think the way they do. And from there, you can start proposing different alternatives. Sometimes bringing your own experience is a good thing. Trying to put a human face to certain problems that we try to address might be more down the person's alley than just having statistics, who is backing what project of law whatsoever. And the other thing is, majority of people who vote are not really our crowd. We tend not to vote and to just really sit back in terms of the electoral process. So the ones who are more likely to vote are the ones who are more likely to be watching TV or listening to the radio. And we have seen that because of ratings, TV channels are very polarized. Their education is not as diverse as we could be. So we should present other means of being able to form your political view. Look at the contradicting opinion. Try to listen to podcasts that might not agree with what you want to hear, but will still expose the other side of the coin.
Kaden?
I'd really like to echo that. You're not going to get accurate information from sources that are clearly polarized and biased. It's just not going to happen. And realistically speaking, it's almost nearly impossible for the average person to be adequately informed on who is the best fit for the job of the president. It's very difficult to branch out wide enough and dig deep enough into all the issues to really understand both how our government works and the actual policies of people we're voting for. And that's part of a reality that we need to accept and know that the average American voter is not equipped with the tools necessary to make an educated decision. So if you don't want to be one of those people, you're going to have to devote a lot of time to reading books, to investigating individually what you believe on these issues, talking to politicians. A great place to do that is at rallies and events. Steve Kelly and I took the College Republicans to CPAC for 2 years now, and we also went to 2 different GOP debates and a bunch of other activities in which we were actually able to interact with the candidates and talk with other people who were also at these events and really understand, what does my fellow voter, my fellow American citizen believe about this issue? Does that belief make sense? Do I agree with it? If not, what is my basis for my belief instead? And that's not something that you can just turn on the TV and get. It requires a lot of work, and for most people, that's not a commitment that they're ready to make.
All right, thank you guys. Was there a question there in the back earlier? Yes.
Yeah, so how would you apply your beliefs about voting and the importance of voting to the primaries, specifically for Iowa residents when we have the Iowa caucus and there are the most candidates available?
Yeah, so primaries is a lot different than general elections. It's much more centered on selecting from a large field the people who fit that field best, or who match our beliefs best. It's much more responsive to what the actual people believe. If you look at some of the primary data, the percentage of primary and caucus voters that actually voted for Trump in the primaries is an extremely small number of the number of total voters. And obviously we've seen those numbers increase, his followers, his backers increase as others dropped out. But when it actually comes to, of all of the primary contenders, what percentage actually supported Donald Trump from the beginning or initially or above the other primary contenders is actually very small. So it's an interesting dynamic and it has its flaws, but it's definitely more valuable to participate in it than it is to participate in the election in which the two candidates are basically largely decided for you already. If that makes sense.
Any thoughts on that?
I agree with him on that one.
We have a question over here.
Heath.
Yeah.
This, well, kind of going along with the question 2 questions ago, we talked about how a lot of people need to be educated, but instead are being influenced by mass media to vote. So, in that degree, like, what do you think? Do you think that media is more like able to decide who's going to be in power than the people actually?
Not really, because the media is a response to people's preferences. When you look at how people choose which stories will make it on the screen, which one would be just the subheading underneath with the flashy news, it's always what will get us the higher ratings. Is having a scandal more profitable than talking about some bombing in Syria? And it always shocks me how the one time that Trump used a knife in a plane, that was on the news. And on the headers, you had 40 people died in a plane crash or something like this. And my question is, who are we as a people that we are more preoccupied with Trump using a knife in a plane than actually people dying in somewhere else? So mass media is a response to what we choose. And I think, again, the fault would fall back on the public.
Yeah, people are people. A voter is a person in the same way that Donald Trump is a person, is the same way that George Soros is a person, the same way that Megyn Kelly is a person. All these people have their flaws, and the only thing really separating them is what we make them, what power we give them, and we have to keep that in mind. We give the media a lot of attention. We give the media a lot of power. Media doesn't exert power over us just because of its inherent nature. It has power in influencing elections because we let it, because we go to it as a credible source, because we're people who are interested in destruction and lies and scandal. And until we decide that we're not going to reward that sort of information, media is going to have a massive impact on elections. So I hope that answers your question.
Let's do one more. Steve?
This one mostly goes to Michael. I'm just curious so during the primary process, we learned that the Democratic Party was actively colluding with the Clinton campaign against the Sanders campaign. How do you rationalize voting for one of the major parties when your personal favorite candidate didn't have a fair chance at winning?
Bernie Sanders said so himself. The only reason he endorsed Hillary was that he could maintain his delegates and still have a significant say on the platform she would run. Unfortunately, the situation we have today is not ideal, but I still think that being active and trying to salvage the vestiges of what was there before is still better than just sitting back and trying to send a message. So in this specific case, I'm not necessarily fond of Hillary as a candidate, but because I know that Bernie Sanders still has a major voice on her campaign, I would still advocate voting for, in this case, the Democratic Party. But even for the Republicans, a lot of Republican candidates have endorsed Trump, essentially maintaining their say in how the Republican agenda is run. So I would still say that your interests can be represented if you vote for one of the two.
Okay, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not particularly. I mean, it's just very telling of the nature of two-party politics. It's all about power, and it's not about truth. It's not about representing people. It's about having an influence on who controls the American people. And I think that voting for one of the two major parties upholds that status quo.
All right. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your participation and your questions. We really appreciate it. We're going to wrap up the debate now with closing arguments from both sides. So Michael, from the start, we'll start with you, we'll end with you. You have 4 minutes.
The situation today is not ideal. Personally, I would advocate a political revolution in the sense that people would be able to have more choice, more options for the candidates. However, as things are today, dreaming might help us strive for a specific direction, but in all practicality, we have to take a decision right now. The train is not gonna stop, so you have to choose which way you wanna go. It's not ideal, but you need to keep in mind who is really being affected by either choices. If you stand back and you don't do anything, you're not just affecting how this country, who is going to be in office, you are essentially affecting the life of millions of people, both nationally and internationally. Questions you need to keep in mind is, who can I work with and who do I trust to listen to the opinion that I would have to offer, be it through my local ballots by voting for representatives in Congress or whichever way. Voting at this point is a necessity. I would say that trying to send a message or trying to clear your conscience for whoever is going to be in office is not going to have any practical benefits. You are just deferring your responsibilities, but at the end of the day, things will still happen. So the question is, what can you do to, as much as he hates the expression, to control the damages? Thank you.
And Kaden?
I just want to make it clear that by abstaining for voting or not voting for a third party doesn't mean that you're not doing anything. Instead, you are taking a stand or rejecting the false choice that is being given to you. A lot of people say that, well, the primaries gave us who we wanted, and to a certain degree that's true, but you also have evidences like in the Democratic, in the DNC, where it wasn't about the people's choice. It was about who had the power, the political power within the party to get who they wanted to the office to the office. So instead of voting and forgetting, instead of going along with the red poison or the blue poison, we should reject that we even have to drink one of the two and vote for a third party candidate and get them the support and power that they deserve. And even if they don't deserve it, it's at least an effort towards increasing the sort of representation and the broad scope of political stances that is being actively suppressed by both the Republican and the Democratic Party. So vote for a third party or don't vote at all, but don't let the people in power give you this false choice that you can pick Trump or you can pick Hillary, because you can't. It doesn't matter. They're both awful. And they're both awful, and no matter if you vote for Hillary or you vote for Trump or you don't vote, one of the two is going to get elected. So if you want to have your hands in that process, go ahead. But I would really encourage you to not sanction what is sure to be a terrible outcome for the next 4 years. Keep your hands clean, vote your conscience, and work towards providing a more conductive environment for democracy and liberty to proliferate in the future.
Thank you guys. Let's give them a round of applause. Yep, before we conclude, actually, we're going to do another vote. So just again to remind everybody, first we're going to do yes in favor of Michael's argument that you should vote for a main party, one of the two main party candidates, and the second that you should not. So all those in favor of voting for a main party candidate, please raise your hand at this time. Raise them high.
You should also ask who switched.
All right, thank you. And against voting for a main party candidate, please raise your hand.
Ben.
Thank you, guys. And just real quick while they're tallying the votes for our sake and for yours as well, how many of you switched during the last hour? That's all it takes. A couple more? Okay. All right, we'll take it. Great. Thank you guys for your participation. We appreciate it.
We'll be around to answer questions or talk individually if you want as well. So. Autographs, too.
Well, hey, let's give one more round of